Hello and welcome everyone to this absolutely pertinent session on business continuity planning and transformation. And I'd like to welcome my fellow panelists in a moment and ask them that you've already seen their bios online. So I'd like to ask them just to tell us a little bit more about, their role and why business continuity planning, what their role is in relation to that, and why it's a particular area of importance. And indeed of importance to all Treasury professionals and finance professionals. So I'd like to start with Davinder, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. And thanks so much for inviting me. I am Davinder Valeri. I'm a Director of Strategy, Risk and Performance within the Research and Guidance arm of CPA Canada, which is the Canadian Accounting Association. I'm a CPA CA. I come from a very, large business background. I've been in industry for a long time. I have a business operations background, primarily from the utilities, energy, and the infrastructure sector. Right now, I lead a team at CPA Canada, which really deals with the business community, business challenges, and government challenges with respect to, we call it drivers of change or the disruptors of change, and whether that be technology, whether it be environment, society. It's really addressing businesses and their needs of today. And now with COVID, and more particularly business continuity, has been a key issue for us right now. And as soon as COVID opened up, my team and even the rest of the CPA Canada's organization, whether it be audit or tax, very quickly we jumped on to the opportunity to help our members understand the implications of COVID and what does it mean for their businesses. And like most governments, our government as well introduced announcements every day since March, and every day the announcement indicated a different stimulus, offered a different element of how society was going to change. And we found it an important element for us to deal with Treasury and to deal with the finance folks on how to manage these changes. And we offered tips, questions around continuity of businesses. I even wrote a blog as soon as the lockdown happened for us, talking around, even as an individual, as a consumer, how can you play a role in helping small businesses? And that's really a big, big part of economy right now for us. And so we took a vested interest, and I personally did as well, in being active in understanding the issues and addressing those issues for our member base, irrespective of where that member base is and irrespective of what sector they belong to. And in Canada, we're very diverse. CPA Canada addresses all sectors and all jurisdictions, even Indigenous. And so we took it upon ourselves to make sure we were at the forefront. We opened up a website really quickly. And even now we're addressing those challenges very, very fast. And also one thing I'll mention quickly, we reached out to other accounting associations and even IFAC just to make sure that globally we were all aligned, and then globally we could make reference to each other if some of our member base was or have a global presence, especially internationally. That's the key part of cooperation right now with this pandemic.
Oh, fantastic, Davinder, your engagement in all that. Thank you very much. I'll move over to Simon now, please.
Yeah, sure. I'm Simon Neville. I'm the Group Treasury Director of Reckitt Benckiser. We're a global fast-moving consumer goods company operating in health, hygiene, and nutrition spaces. We've been affected, obviously, by COVID-19, both within the Treasury function, but within the business. But we've been rather fortunate because two of our brands are Dettol and Lysol, so they've also been at the forefront of the fight against the virus. Within Treasury, my remit is we effectively operate the global bank, so we fund 160 countries from the centre. We also manage the global insurances for the group, run the in-house bank, and do all the funding. So during the crisis, actually unrelated to COVID-19, we did a bond issue for a couple of £1 billion, which was a new experience to do that remotely, and also roadshowed in 2 different markets. So it's been an interesting time, and it continues.
Some fascinating experience there, and I see a little trend here as well about contribution during this period from both of you so far. So with that, I'll move on to Paul, please.
Thanks. I'm Paul Rosen. I'm a director in NatWest Treasury, and I look after our advisory and insurance team. There's about 18, 19 of us around in the UK and in India, and we're responsible for providing sort of risk and control oversight and assessment for the department and operating key processes such as our business continuity planning, incident management, and identifying what critical services we provide to the UK economy. So I'm responsible for making sure the Treasurer and his management team are able to ensure that they can work from home successfully and that COVID doesn't take us out of risk appetite.
Great stuff. Well, thank you all for those great introductions. We've seen a lot of change over the past months, of course, and not least the move to working from home. But that's not all that's impacted on businesses. I'd like to ask you each in turn what you think have been the biggest lessons learned for financial professionals around business continuity planning, good and bad. And if I could start perhaps with Simon on this.
No, sure. I think from our side, the one thing that has pleasantly surprised us is actually the IT infrastructure. Within RB, that has stood up incredibly well, and I think far better than anybody expected. And in fact, a lot of people are saying it's actually better at home than it is within the office environment, because there's probably less things that can go wrong in many ways. It's obviously very difficult from a team point of view, from getting the nuances and the body language that you would normally have by working with a team within a group. So that's not so good on the other side. But operationally, it's gone well. We had a few teething and problems with some of the banks to start with. We were fortuitous. We'd run our DR plan actually a couple of weeks before we finally decamped, I think 17 weeks ago now, 18 weeks ago. So we were in quite a good space, if you like, going into this. So it's been good. I mean, in the round, it's probably been good. I think the team has enjoyed some of the freedoms that have come. Those with young children or living alone, I think it's been very challenging for them, but you have to support them as well during these things.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Simon. And Davinder, what's your perspective on this, both from your role, but also what you're hearing from your members?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because our members, and as soon as COVID happened, I mean, we ended up stopping travel right away, as you know. But I held virtual meetings because they were already planned, and not that I was planning for COVID. It's just that the meetings were virtual, and so I had a lot of committee meetings with my members. And in the beginning in March, when we met with them, a lot of the folks talked about the challenges of working from home and the challenges around technology. And even myself, we were faced with, do you use Zoom? Do you use Skype? Do you use Teams? Like, what do you use, right? And even the pitfalls of technology very quickly was a lesson that was learned around how do you protect yourself when you're actually using these platforms? We were hacked and just that. So I think the concern technology is a big one. Do you have the capability, or do you need to now beef up your capabilities on how to use technology, and are you educated enough? Our members talked about that. But another one was around supply chain. That was a lesson learned where a lot of our member base had to start retooling, where they were in manufacturing and all of a sudden the government tapped them on their shoulder and they started producing masks, or they started producing shields. And they very quickly were able to pivot, and we were able to help and work with them in terms of what does that look like. And from a financial lens, also helping them to understand it's not your core business, but you are actually retooling because you're helping address a climate emergency, but you're also trying to add to the economy. So that was another lesson learned, is how do we help our members understand how they have to retool and consider supply chain. And another one was around just the element of health and safety. A lot of our members talked about they now needed to understand how do they address the safety aspects of, one, working from home, and then two, making their staff comfortable with, if they ever start thinking about coming back to work, what does that look like? So having to change some of their policies, work at home policies, talk about what does safety look like now, and then on the health side, how do you keep talking to your employees around the health aspect of it, making them feel comfortable. And even if someone is sick and they're working from home, how do they address those issues or requirements that could be on the table? And one piece that we talked about, I remember it was with one of the pension funds, was around communications. And he mentioned to me saying that it was so important for him to understand how should he now communicate with his staff, because Previously, you would have a staff meeting and everybody would be in the boardroom and you would very quickly be able to communicate. But now he needed to understand those that are working from home that have kids, are they going to be comfortable having a town hall meeting with me? Can I really communicate with them the way I could before? Or do I now need to change my tactic on how I actually reach out to my staff and my employees, and understanding the different levels that you have to now communicate to? That was another lessons learned in how does an organization reconfigure their business model and how they actually deal with their staff. So those were some of the other areas.
Yeah, very interesting, and into that real people focus. I'll move on to Paul though now to get your perspective on the good and the bad of the lessons through on this continuity.
Sure. I think COVID has been eye-opening from a business continuity perspective. So I would, in previous years, I would test my business continuity plan. I'd do call cascades to make sure I could reach all my staff. I'd ensure my systems, suppliers, and processes were documented and understood, so that in the event of typically fire, flood, terrorism, we would be able to respond, keep our people safe, and keep our customers able to access banking services, which Treasury sits right in the centre of. It's fair to say that COVID and business continuity doesn't always account for government direction and pandemic. And although we have a pandemic plan, and which we used, it's fair to say that we typically would expect to take traders to a recovery site and typically expect to have a full set of trader kit outside our main offices. Clearly, when a lockdown occurs and when if you can work from home, you should, as government guidance, we had to look very quickly and very carefully at how do we move traders to home. And I think for us, that was the, what went well. We were able to do that, and the group was able to take, typically, I don't know, thousands of staff to tens and tens of thousands of staff working from home remotely over secure connections. And from our trader perspective, we were able to get them the support they needed to do it in a safe way. So that went well. Probably the big learning, though, is that to do things well like that, you need the right people in the right meetings, and you need to make decisions quickly. And sometimes systems and processes aren't necessarily configured to make quick decisions. Yes, I can call cascade you very quickly with a button that I can do in case there's a terrorist incident, but I can't necessarily set up so that you have voice recorded mobile devices available at home immediately. So there are things that we need to work through, but it's been a real challenge, but really interesting.
Well, thanks, Paul. And that's some of what we've been hearing from treasurers, their perception. So, and of course, we're all biased in the Treasury world, perhaps, but most of the treasurers that I've spoken to personally have said, well, in fact, all have said that it was a pretty seamless transition for them to working from home. They then said they thought it was maybe a little tricky for the broader finance group in their business, and then more difficult for some parts of the rest of the business. That was the general consensus. And then they also said they felt some of their banks also had some issues, which maybe some of which you referred to, and I'll come back to that shortly. Well, actually, I'll stay on that point actually now as we're with you, Paul. What's your view? Do you think, compared with, say, a corporate treasury function, that the banks did have more difficulties? And we know that some who had different centres, say in other locations, that were then hit at different times by different circumstances, that they had some teething problems. Nothing major, but maybe it just was a few more days than was comfortable, shall we say. Would you agree with that, or is as a generality across the banking sector, not specifically, of course, to NatWest?
So I'll use a generic example that would have happened to us and most of our competitors, I would imagine. Traders wouldn't typically ever work from home. There are reasons for that the regulator would normally have in place. And part of that is to prevent and detect market abuse, for which you have particular systems and processes in place to do that typically operate within a sort of office environment. To go then to a situation where you need to get those people home for safety reasons, we do not want them commuting, or they may not even be able to commute. They've never done that before. So it wasn't as easy as perhaps we would like. Yes, the finance professionals we have in Treasury, or the liquidity experts, or the capital experts who are SMEs, would typically have worked from home 1, 2, even 3 days a week. And that's fine, they've tested that. Traders might not even have computers at home because they've only ever worked in the office, and at home they can't trade. So there's no sort of come home and sort of work on late. So it wasn't as easy. However, with I think sort of sweat and tears, it happened quickly. And I think that's sort of a demonstration that in some cases you put the BCP plan to one side and you look at the practicalities and go, right, I need laptops. Where do I get them from for tomorrow? Because I can't wait X number of weeks for the normal procurement process. So it wasn't as easy, but we got there, and hopefully no one on the outside for the industry has seen an impact in terms of their relationships and how they were served. So that's what we were trying to do for the whole time.
That's been fascinating, I think, because it's not really my area, but regulation has often said, a financial service can't work from home. And certainly I know from my own experience with shared service centres in other countries that we were running, that in those countries they said, well, we can't possibly do that. There are different protocols or different things that we have to observe. And it's actually been shown that it is actually possible if you have to. Where there's a will, there's a way, I guess. But I'll turn now to our other panelists, just to ask, first of all, Simon, what's your perception? Was it easy for treasurers to work from home? Is it more difficult for the rest of the business?
Easy probably wouldn't be the word I'd use, to be honest with you, Caroline. I mean, I think it's been demanding and challenging for everybody. We saw very few problems with banks. I mean, I think we had 2 or 3 missed confirmations that were resolved pretty quickly. I think people were alive to the need to have a seamless service. Our own side, we had a couple of laptops burn out, but before we decamped from the office, we'd actually allocated 3 immediate replacement laptops so they could be couriered to people's houses, or they could collect them from the office. So, and we've kept that in sort of background all the time. So for us, I would say it's more around the longer this goes on, it becomes difficult for people. I think people get fatigued. I think some of the things we're seeing now in the UK, where things are unlocking a little bit socially, makes it easier. But for those with young children or people that are living alone, or they've got old relatives, or they've got relatives overseas, it's tough. Frankly, my team's done an amazing job in keeping everything going. And every week I sort of start the week feeling what's going to go wrong. And at the end of the week, I kind of have a huge sigh of relief. And nothing has gone wrong. So, it's been, from that side, good. From a team spirit point of view, it's not so easy. Even with regular calls, some people don't want to put their cameras on. Some people don't want cameras, into their bedrooms, onto their private space. And, we have to respect that. And, we're starting to think about return to work, but that's a little way away. I mean, we were lucky in some way that we're also refurbishing our head office. So that pretty much started as we decamped. And won't be finished till September, which I think is quite fortunate, if you like, in timing. So, but we are seeing banks return in London, going back to the office. We're aware that some banks in Asia have gone back with 100% attendance now in the office. I think people generally aren't comfortable with that, not just yet, anyway, in the UK. So we'll have to see how that evolves, really.
Absolutely. I certainly know my team at the ACT, people are very happy working from home, and I think, feeling safe there. But there are those issues that you talk about, those frustrations. And we know that, 30% of the UK workforce, they say, I don't know how it is in Canada, for instance, but they're saying about 30% are suffering from mental health issues. Yes. And it is, we talk about working from home, but it's actually not working. It's not normal working from home. It's working from home and not able to go out in the evening or have any other activities or whatever else when you're in lockdown. So it does put a lot of pressure on people, absolutely. I'll move to Davinder now, though, to ask, your members, how are they seeing it? Has it been a smooth transition? Are there parts of their businesses that are finding it more difficult? Is finance doing okay, or has it been a challenge?
So I think just to reiterate what the other panelists were saying as well, it was quite seamless for most organizations that we dealt with. There were some organizations that could not work from home, some transport trucking companies that we deal with, that they had to go to the office. So, that the challenge, if I start with work from home challenge, it was, I think, in 2 parcels. The first parcel would be the technology piece that we talked about, which is really, how can you do your job, and do you have the tools to do your job, and then the expectations from an employer to do your job. So that was the first tranche, and I think when we look at the phases of COVID and in the beginning of it, when the lockdown, where I think everybody was eager to work from home, eager to get their job done, and eager to show their employer that they could do their job, and that's what we found. And even the surveys that we did. And what was happening there was that piece that you talk about, the social piece, was starting, but people were eager to do their job, and they didn't know when to not do their job. So they were doing their job all the time, it felt like, because they could not separate where their laptop was on the couch with them versus when they were actually relaxing. So that was one challenge that came from that first prong about technology and working from home right away. And as we moved through the stages, and in Toronto, especially now that we're in phase 2, I think people became comfortable working from home, but that second piece is coming into play, which is the social piece. And we're seeing a strong surge of the social aspect. So some of the members that I talk to, the committees that they sit on, they talk about they're dealing with mental health. They're dealing with how do they address the social issues that their employees are now voicing to them. There is a concern. I don't know if you know, people were holding like coffee chats or drink parties, and so those were like, in evenings you could have a Zoom call, but it wasn't addressing the social piece of it, meaning that yes, in person I can see you, you're there, but I can't touch you, I can't sense what you're feeling. So what we found in that second tranche of the social side, the mental health side, is that there is this piece of people that they're feeling that they're disalienated, they're basically alienated from the rest of their peers. They need to work in that group mentality. They need to reach out to their peers. They need to work with others. And right now, actually, we're doing a paper on that to talk about what is the social aspect and how does it help, how does it impact mental health. So I don't know if you know, Google announced that they're going to be working from home. Everybody is. The big pushback right now that Google is getting from their employees has been around, well, hold on a second. I relied on going to the office every day because that's how I communicated with my peers. I needed that social interaction. I only live in a 500 square foot condo. I never anticipated to be spending all my time in this small space. So there's pieces now that are starting to crack on the social side that we're looking at more closely. And for our member base, I think that was a part now that we have to address more. And I have another committee call coming up in end of July that we're going to talk about what does that look like, and then how do we actually address that in a recovery phase? Because as you talk about restart or recovery, and then we talk about people going back to the office, there is this new stress that is percolating in people's minds around, well, hold on, I don't want to go back to the office. I'm not sure if I feel safe going back to the office. I'm not sure if I trust the transit system that gets me to the office. How do you guarantee that I will be safe? How do you guarantee that I will be healthy? So we're actually addressing a lot of that. Our member base is sending out surveys to understand how their employees are actually dealing with some of these additional stressors that are coming to play now that we're actually thinking about restarting the economy. I don't know if you guys are also faced with that question, Paul or Simon.
I would say a lot of people, it almost depends on the sort of the bracket that they're coming from. So I think the people with young children, obviously it all depends on what happens with childcare and schooling. And I think as they return, people will feel easier coming back into the office. And I think if they're, without being in any way ageist about it, but I think if you're at the sort of, if you like the younger end of the spectrum, you're going to be quite keen to get back into the working environment, potentially to get away from maybe limited space or getting away from your mum and dad if you spend time with your mum and dad, which is kind of is good for a few days, but kind of, if you're 22, 23, it's probably not what you signed up for. So I think we're expected to see things change, but I think we'll return over I think people need to feel comfortable with coming back. So we're looking at the external guidance from the government. We're looking from the internal configuration of our building. And then it comes down to a matter of choice. And I think we have to see, how that choice lands, because that, I don't know what happens after that, if you like. If people say, well, we don't want to come back, then it gets potentially very challenging to maintain teams permanently, remotely, permanently in this condition. And as you say, permanently operating out of 500 square feet. For some people is going to be, very, very difficult, I think.
I'd probably agree. It's been the mental health side of things been something that the bank has focused on extensively, particularly for if you're operating processes which don't have as much need to do social interaction even on Zoom. So that's been quite tough. And then Zoom as a whole, and I know we're on here today on Zoom, it doesn't have the same feeling for most people as, you know, obviously having a coffee or having a desk interaction. And people will say that, you know, swinging by someone's desk is where they found out about an additional fact or piece of work that was interesting and relevant to their current work. And on Zoom, it doesn't come out as much. So that's definitely been there. Getting back into the office, though, is interesting because pre-COVID, people would say, I wish I had flexible working because then I could play tennis at lunchtime and log on later. They now have the opportunity to do that, give or take what's open and what's available. But they've started to realize that actually being in the office with their colleagues some of the time is really quite valuable. So we're going to have to look really carefully at, you know, what does the future of office working mean, and how much time do you spend in and out, and why? I don't think, you know, many industries could say everybody is going to be full-time back in the office again forever, because I think there's been benefits and cost mitigation that have been identified through work from home, and we have to explore that and do that properly. Absolutely,
and it is a really complex issue, isn't it? And when you start to, people are clearly making these assumptions like Google that Davinder referred to, but people have different opinions, and if we imagine a world where it's kind of a bit of a mix, there's more people. The studies are showing that there will be more people working from home than there were in the past. But then you get into a situation where, say, you've got one part of the team in the office and one part of the team at home. And I think what we're going through now, learning how to work better virtually, is going to be really helpful for that. Because in the past, those who work from home, or those who were in a different country and therefore dialed into the meeting, were often left out. We were very poor in our behaviours in terms of including people who were on the end of the line, shall we say. And I think it's possibly a good thing that's going to come out of this is we're going to be more adept at including people in a virtual world, where we're going to most likely have a more hybrid model going forwards. But perhaps we could just shift to a slightly different area, and that's around cybercrime and fraud. You know, people are saying, well, statistics are showing that that's increased, and clearly criminals are taking advantage of the COVID-19 situation in various ways. I just wondered if that's something that you have been seeing, and whether, you know, the financial controls and so on that are in place normally in a business are sufficient, or if there's increased risk to the business continuing, you know, financially, if there's a serious crime perpetrated against you, you're going to have financial issues. So maybe we'll stay with you, Paul, and you could give your thoughts on that question.
Sure. I mean, within the Treasury Department, where we're sort of mostly dealing with large corporates or wholesale, clearly these aren't the type of clients that would be either hopefully exposed to issues from us or from us to them. I think once you get into the retail commercial side of the business, there are government schemes such as, you know, business bounce back loans, and obviously you can move up the ladder in size, but let's, you know, stay on business bounce back. As a bank, you are exposed more because obviously government lending schemes, particularly those that have small application requirements, are attractive for criminals. And then in addition, you've got more people who are at home working. And therefore, if you are a cyber criminal or just someone out there trying to do, you know, the typical scam of, I'm a BT engineer, please give me your details, there are more people at home you can reach. And some of those people won't necessarily have the support networks around them to prevent that. So I think we're very conscious, you know, within our organization of how we help customers mitigate fraud to them and make sure that they are protected if that the worst does happen. But at the same time, within the Treasury function, it's not as relevant for us because we're mostly dealing with sophisticated counterparties who are operating typically exactly the same controls as they were pre-COVID. I mean, you might have some differences on, you know, wet signatures versus, you know, dry signatures, you know, in terms of we're getting more done electronically. And there's things to think about in terms of onboarding, KYC, AML on that. But broadly, you know, it's fairly business as usual for the banking Treasury.
Thanks, Paul. And Simon, is it business as usual for you too, or how do you see?
Yeah, I would echo what Paul said. Actually, I think from a group treasury point of view, we're using our TMS, we're using deal matching confirmation systems. Everything is pretty much automated. Actually, we've seen some good developments in the elimination of wetting, if you like. So DocuSign is starting to be used a little bit more. Certainly, it's accelerated it internally within my own firm. I suppose for me, it's always that people, the longer things like this go on, the more people can become complacent. I think at the early stages, in a funny way, people were very much more probably alive to the risk. cybercrime or attempts at cybercrime and hacking have been with us for a long time. I mean, my own firm was a victim to it in June. I think it was June 2017. And it's massively disruptive when it happens. So I think you have to maintain vigilance. It's something I reinforce with the team on a fairly regular basis, because I think we all get kind of spam emails in our personal lives, and sometimes we don't realize that these things can happen at work as well. So I think it's about not letting your guard down, basically, and just keeping that up. And that is quite hard to do when you're operating by definition in a bit of a silo, around your kitchen table or dining room table or spare bedroom or home office, however you're configured. But so far, no, I mean, so far it hasn't been an issue for us. As far as I'm aware, there's been no incidents within the business.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, sorry, Caroline, I was just going to just add that. I think it's fair to say the regulators for banks have a view, though, that, and this does apply to Treasury, because obviously some of the activities we do is more trading, not trading, but it's more front office than other parts of, say, our Treasury department. They have a view that we definitely need to evidence very strongly why we're comfortable that work from home doesn't expose financial markets to more fraud, market abuse, etc. Why are we comfortable people are sitting in their living room with the ability to book a derivative, for example? And we have to be really clear on what controls we have either put in place that are new, or what controls we've relaxed, and why we accept that. I mean, as an example of something that most in the industry have probably done is, if you do have a trader at home, we've had to ask, what do your partners do? Do they work for competitors? Do they work for other financial institutions on the other side? Which, if you're both sitting at the same table, it could potentially be a problem. And most employees, while they would have disclosed things like share dealing pre-COVID, we wouldn't have had to go to that level of personal details and ask, what does your spouse do, or your partner do, or what do people living with you do, to try and evidence that we have thought about some of the conflicts that could arise. So that is definitely a high priority at the moment, making sure our regulators are comfortable that things aren't going wrong that we haven't yet seen.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Thanks for that, Paul. And Davinder, Canadian CPAs, what are they saying?
Actually, I'm very comforted with both Simon and Paul's responses. So that actually feels really good that there's this security in play. Because we deal with such a diverse array of member base, the one element about automation is, I'll just raise that, whether it be on the payment side. So I know Payments Canada now is helping our government try to automate all checks that are being issued by the government to avoid manual checks being delivered to businesses or to organizations or individuals around the stimulus that's being spread out. So we had an issue, a bit of a fraud issue around that, where people were taking advantage of the manual checks. So I think that automation is a big important piece right now on the payment side. I think having alternative payment options for individuals or businesses is another key. Right now, we're so heavily reliant upon having to physically go to the bank to make the deposits, and I think the electronic checks and all that good stuff is an important piece right now. But on the cybersecurity side, and the elements of being hacked or fraud, it has increased for us. Our member base. What they have said is that they're starting to become more vigilant with respect to their security and their controls and their firewalls. And they've had to basically, even though the comfort is there, they may not have been attacked, they're just being a bit more aware of the risk and the mitigation elements around that. They're being a bit more careful. So their continuity business plans are actually saying, okay, let's pay more attention to the risk element of our cyber side. Are we protected? Do we have the right firewalls in play? And then also, we've had one of my members, he ran ransomware. I mean, they got attacked, and it was before COVID, but I think like Simon mentioned, your controls that are in place before COVID are just as relevant post COVID. I mean, COVID hasn't heightened anything differently. It just made you a bit more aware. So his response to me was, well, Davinder, now we're much more protected. Now, because of that attack, I know where my information is. And so now that everybody's working from home, I'm very, very comfortable with respect to our procedures around cyber attacks or any type of security that's required. I'll just maybe do a quick plug if I can, but from a CPA Canada perspective, we have been doing a lot of work around cybersecurity. helping our members, especially in the small businesses, how better to be aware of what to look for and how to protect yourself from cyber. Like, you know, people do their banking on the phone, and sometimes they don't necessarily have the right measures in place when they're doing that banking, and very quickly you could get jeopardized, and someone can, you know, look over your shoulder or whatever and copy your pin down, whatever you're doing. But we do give them some tips around that. And I think it's very important. People become sometimes complacent around their security measures. But cyber is, even we at CP Canada did get, compromised a little bit around that space. We're trying to be more diligent and more aware and practice what we're telling others. But it is an area, even, you know, as I'm on the call right now, everything is on mute, but I've had 2 calls around telling me that something on my bank has been shut down. If I don't call, they're going to basically send me to jail. So we get these so often, these calls, right? Constantly saying that if you don't respond right away, you know, you're going to be in jail or whatever. So I think we're trying to create more awareness with our members to be more diligent and be aware and just don't get caught off guard.
It's thanks, Davinder. I mean, it's a really interesting thing because a lot of the research that show if you have good financial controls, you're pretty well protected, and it's around behaviours, and one of the behaviours is fear. So if they scare you, it's like the messages from your chief exec and so on. It's using fear or using even helpfulness. There's a great story that I just love from one of these ethical hackers. And so he goes into a reception in the days where you could go into a reception, of course, and cup of coffee. And he just, as he gets to the reception, he spills his coffee on papers he's holding. And he says to the receptionist, "Oh no, I'm here for an interview. This is my CV. You know, it is my USB. Could you just print me off another copy?" He's in their system. He also talked about going, once he's in the building, because he tests these things out, he's going towards this very securely locked IT room or cupboard, whatever, and waits for somebody to come out. But he's carrying a very large box. He moves purposefully towards the IT room, and of course, they let him in. Helpfulness. So it's something that you maybe don't think about, but it's those behaviours. It's not just, it happens on laziness, as we know with passwords, etc., etc. But I'll stop with that one there, because I'd like to move now to ask Simon about. So I was talking to one of the FTSE 100 group treasurers, and they were saying, you know, we've been always naturally suspicious of the system, so we were pretty well set up to deal with anything. And I think that comes in 2 areas. One, around your business continuity plans in terms of how you can work remotely and what happens, and all the logistical side of it. But it also, in the Treasury world, of course, applies to how you manage your liquidity and what your access is to liquidity, depending on your kind of business. And if a pandemic hits and you aren't prepared in various ways, then you've got problem, of course. So I just wanted to ask Simon, you know, what do you think treasurers would have done in the past that worked really well for them, I suppose, in this situation, because they were resilient in one way or another? And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit around that, please.
Yeah, I suppose within RB, in a very strange way, we were fortunate. I mean, we had a cyber attack in. As I said, in June 2017, it's a public thing. Within Treasury, we weren't particularly impacted, but we failed over into our online banking. We couldn't actually access our Treasury management system for quite a few days when that happened, but we could access our online banking, and we had disaster recovery plans, business continuity plans, where we could set ourselves up very quickly at home and access everything. So this time, that was a fairly well-rehearsed fire drill from RB, and it's something we regularly do when people work from home. We make sure our dealers do work from home. Occasionally, that the connectivity is there, and that's kind of a part of a normal process. So I think from that point of view, we were set up fine. I think the initial situation in mid-March was a little bit hysterical. The reaction probably from the financial markets felt a little bit hysterical. I think people were beginning to think, you know, the world was going to end, and in some way money was going to disappear. And it was probably a difficult 2 weeks. From our own point of view, we run a relatively high level of liquidity at the centre. We took a decision fairly on in the process to increase that level of liquidity without going completely overboard, if you like. And we've not really experienced any operating problems. I mean, we haven't not been able to fund any part of the business. We've had no problem with our supply chain financing programs. We were sort of locked out, like a lot of people, from the commercial paper markets for a few weeks. They've pretty much returned to normal. But our backup facilities that we had in place for exactly that purpose were just drawn down and served the purpose. So from our point of view, it was actually okay. I think people were working incredibly long hours at the beginning. The board obviously needed to be briefed on what was going on. So that brings a degree of intensity, if you like, into your day job that isn't normally there. Probably at a time when you don't expect it. I mean, we all expected at year end and half year or quarter ends, or when you're doing a transaction, but you don't expect it maybe in mid-March when everything, you're actually basking in the glory of having just published your numbers. It should be a relatively quiet period where you start to think about the planning process for the year ahead. But apart from that, no, I mean, no real issues, I would say. But as always, I think the large companies and the large banks, over the last few years, they've spent an enormous amount of money, I think, in making sure their resiliency is there, in making sure that people, the old days where you couldn't get hold of somebody because you had the wrong phone number. I mean, that's just, for us, that was not an issue at all. The biggest thing is, if people are on vacation, making sure you get in contact with them whilst they're away, making sure they've got the right setup at home, and then trying to support them as they go through it. So we've made sure that people can work effectively from home. They've got the right, where they've got space for a desk, or the right chair, where they've got 2 screens, stuff like that. We've obviously had to do a little bit of work around that to fill in some gaps, but no, it's okay.
Well, thanks, Simon. As you point out, for the larger companies, in almost every way, unless they've been really hit hard for whatever reason by COVID-19, they're always in a better position, whether it's with government schemes. So, for instance, in the UK, the CCFF scheme, those who already have facilities, it was easier for them to access that than some of what we were calling the stranded middle at the time. And I think in all these things, smaller companies don't have as many resources. It's more difficult for them to have all these kind of plans and processes at the kind of best-in-class level that some of the larger organisations would have. And it's kind of like a double whammy, I suppose. You're hitting even harder in these kinds of situations. So maybe just turn to Davinder, because you have a mix of members, large and small. Are you finding that as well, that it's, in terms of planning and being resilient and thinking for the future, particularly the learnings now, is it going to be more difficult for those smaller and medium-sized enterprises?
I think definitely, and I think they are the ones that are going to be impacted the most. And as it's not business as usual anymore, and I'm not even sure what it is. So we talk about the next normal. The recovery is going to implement, I would say, new measures that perhaps are going to be a burden on some of these small to mid-sized enterprises. We talk about the burdens, or even on the health and safety aspect of it, the requirement for new procedures. Some of them don't have those costs as part of that, even though with government funding, I think that's a big change. Other change is just going to be around. We have a restaurant that I deal with, a small business, where they rely on the number of folks that are in this restaurant at full capacity. But now, post-COVID, they cannot manage at full capacity when we get to phase 3. In phase 2, they can't even open inside, but outside for the patio. So what does that mean? So normally 100% of your revenue now is cut down to 50% if people are going to even come and eat at your restaurant. So, and what's the viability of that business now operating in the future? So with the new requirements around long-term thinking and business resiliency with new business resilient models, I strongly do believe that the small to mid-sized enterprises are the ones that are going to be really challenged and struggling. But in the future, we may not see very many of them just because of that. The whole business model around sustainability is going to be at play for these smaller organizations. And even the comment that Simon made around having a resilient organization with the controls that are in play. I think the small organizations, even if they have the controls in play, they're relying on the revenues. And if the revenues are not going to be coming, if the cash flow isn't there, then they can't survive, right?
Yeah, no, it's very, very tough, and it's very, very worrying, isn't it? Paul, what's your perspective?
I mean, obviously, banks have gone through challenging times over the last decade and a half, where mistakes have led to the need to be bailed out, and that we've then had to put in place, either by direction from the government or through our own strategic agenda, significant remediation to make sure we have the liquidity and capital needed for downturns. So I can't go through all of the processes because I'm not involved in many of them, but there are a huge amount. So whether it's operational continuity and resolution, making sure that your bank can operate pre, during and after a resolution event, whether it's just during BAU, having the BCP plans, the IM plans tested, whether it's identifying your critical weaknesses in your supply chain and ensuring you have a second tier supply ready to step in. All of these things are happening in the background, so that when a market sort of disruption occurs, and I sort of echo the point that maybe there was some overreaction initially, but when that does occur, everything swings together to make sure that the board's engaged, that there's daily meetings multiple times a day on liquidity, multiple times a day on making sure that we understand our strategy going forward, and Treasury is at the heart of that. So I think we've taken the learnings from the past to mean that for this type of event, fortunately, we're able to put all of that in place to keep customers safe and keep the bank safe and secure. Learnings for the future, though, are that the pandemic and that risk that isn't specific to a system has fallen over, or our customers can't access cash because the cash machine network is down, which are very serious. But our playbook, almost, this has gone wrong, what do I do? This was much broader. And we need to make sure that we're set up to deal with broad sort of geopolitical events and this stuff going forward. So definitely an area of sort of focus.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. And I'm afraid we're running out of time now, but I'd like to thank our panelists very much. I say, Davinder, the paper you referenced and a few other things you're doing, I hope I'll get a sight of them at some point. They sound very, very good pieces of work. And just to thank all three of you, it's been a delight to have you here in this session. It's been a very varied discussion, and I think our audience will really enjoy it. So thank you very much once again. And have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.